I am such an idiot. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another day of Bookmas. In today's video, as you guys can already tell from the title, we are going to go through all of the books that I read this year, and this is going to be the last video of the year and the last video of Bookmas. There's been a lot of stuff that I've been reflecting on, so we're just gonna go ahead and go through all the books that I've read in 2025, including talking about some of the books that I've DNF'd and some of the books that are currently still in my reading list that I'm currently reading, but I haven't finished just yet. Because if you guys recall from a couple of videos prior to this one, I have said that um, I have a couple of books that I've read. I've started, but I haven't finished it because I'm still reading and I'm also reading it leisurely. So, yeah, we're gonna go through all of the 38 books that I've read this year. I have a 50 book reading goal this year, but sadly, I couldn't achieve that. I still have like 12 more books that I need to read, and I just don't think it's a possibility because today is already December 18th. Today was supposed to be the last day that I upload my Bookmas videos, but life happens, stuff happens, and yeah. So, we're just gonna go ahead and start from the beginning of the year. So, starting off in January, I read only one book, and that was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This book averaged a 4.18 on Goodreads, and I rated this book a 4 stars. Now, for me in general, sometimes I still think back to this book in particular because um I think that the love story was very beautifully written. I absolutely loved it, but for some reason, I just haven't had the inclination to pick up the second book as much as I want to know what happens next. The story ended in Divine Rivals. I felt like we were all just hung on a cliffhanger, but we already have Ruthless Vows and it's already out anyways, but I just haven't had the inclination to actually get the book and read it, so maybe next year. But moving on to the month of February is where I read two books this month. It's Process. Okay, so the second book that I read this year was Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. So Yours Truly was my first Abby Jimenez book. I did not know that I had to read Part of Your World before going into Yours Truly, but that's okay. I don't mind. This book was, as I said, my first Abby Jimenez book, and I've heard such amazing reviews on this book that I was really anticipating this book. And my brother actually bought it for me last Christmas, so I'm very thankful for that. And this book averaged a 4.31 on Goodreads, and I rated it a 5 stars. I absolutely love the story. If you guys didn't already know what Yours Truly is about, is basically about two doctors. One, her name is Brianna. Here, has a brother who is in urgent need of a is was it like a kid? I think he had like a kidney disorder or something. He needed someone to donate his kidney for him because he really urgently needs it. And then you meet a new doctor in the building. His name is Jacob. He deals with anxiety and social anxiety in general and social anxiety. But he made this really great deed and decided to become Brianna's brother kidney donor. And then afterwards, they struck up a deal where Brianna helps Jacob get through his family and whatnot. So it was a really sweet read. I think it was done very, very well, and I absolutely loved it. Jacob as a person was just an amazing character, and I absolutely loved him. Feel connected to Jacob in certain levels because I do deal with anxiety, and so watching no reading somebody who is also struggling through anxiety really gives you some perspective to it. So that's my thoughts on Yours Truly. The next book I read in February, and this took up most of my time in February, and that was Magnolia Park's Into the Dark, the third and final book installment from the Magnolia Park series in Magnolia and BJ's Point of View by Jessa Hastings. This book averaged a 4.38 and I rated it a 5 stars. Now, I can't tell you in details what this book is about because it will spoil the first two books in the series in their point of view. But what I can say is that I really love the character development in this book, the healing process for both characters, and I just see so much growth and so much emotional development from both BJ and Magnolia, and I just absolutely loved it. I feel like I really want to reread the Magnolia Parks and BJ's book over again next year because they just hold a special place in my heart, and sometimes that little piece of my heart still beats for them because I miss them very, very much. And I rated that a 5 stars if I hadn't said that already. On to the month of March. This is where I kind of had like a mental spiral thing going on in March, and it was kind of a hard month for me. But despite that being a not such a great time, um, I did, however, read a couple of books. I read four books, so that was a really good accomplishment for the month of March. So the first book I read was Daisy Hates the Great Undoing. The second book in Daisy Hates, Julian Hates, and Christian's point of view from the characters in the Magnolia Parks universe series. Yeah, it's kind of, if you guys aren't in the Magnolia Parks lore, it's kind of hard to explain, but there's basically two different books in the same series. One book, one of the books have Magnolia and BJ's point of view, which is the Magnolia Parks book, and then you have the Daisy Hates book, which is the point of view of Daisy, Julian, and Christian from the same series. So you have two different. It kind of feels like two different worlds living in the same roof. So I don't know, do with that information as you may, but Daisy Hates the Great Undoing by Jessa Hastings. This book averaged a 4.48 on Goodreads, and I rated the book a 4 stars. Now I can't really be very specific about what I think about the book, but um it was alright. If you guys loved the first Daisy Hates book, you probably will love the second book. But for me, I think it was probably because I am more of a Magnolia Parks and BJ girl than I am a Daisy girl. So yeah, it's kind of hard to tell you my opinion about this book because I also was in such a rough time that I feel like I was semi living at that moment. And so while I was reading this book, I couldn't really comprehend most of what was happening because what was happening with me was taking a toll in my mental health and my brain. So yeah, but it was a pretty enjoyable read, I might have to say, because I did rate it 4 stars. Okay, next up we have Not Here to Stay Friends by Caitlin Hill. This book is criminally underrated. I love this book so, so much. If you guys have watched my previous videos, you know how much I've raved about this book alone. I absolutely love this. This book averaged a 3.71 on Goodreads, and I rated it. I think I rated it 3.5 stars, but I might just bump it up to a 4 stars because I just love the premise of the book. It tells a story of two best friends. Her name is Sloane. She flies to LA to meet her best friend Liam, whose dad is actually a producer on a teen dating show. And Sloane had to step in last minute to help his dad and dating show, but then she goes through all of these dramas in the teen dating show and also trying to navigate feelings about her best friend. So, it was a pretty enjoyable read. It was very funny, very high school, and I loved it. It just gave me the butterflies and it made me happy reading this. I truly think that this was one of those books that really, really entertained me during a really bad season in my life. So yeah, I rated it a probably 3.5 stars, but I will bump it up to a 4 stars because I love that book so, so much. Next up is A Curse for True Love, which is the third and final book from the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy by Stephanie Garber. This book averaged a 4.13 on Goodreads, and I rated it a 5 stars. This book was really fun. It was really fascinating. I feel like that was a very satisfying conclusion to the story, even though, like, there's a moral of the story. I found that this book was very easy for me to read. It was also very fast paced, and I was very anticipating this book. The last, just the last part of the book, and I think I just flew by. I think I did read this book in a vlog that is up somewhere, but yeah, I enjoyed this book. I couldn't really tell you much about what happens in this book because I will be spoiling the first two books. So if you haven't picked up Once Upon a Broken Heart yet, you probably should because it's a really great book. Next up, I continued a series that I started last year. I only read the first book last year, and I resumed the series this year and completed it, successfully completed it. And that book in question is Heartless by Elsie Silver, which is part of the Chestnut Spring series. This is book two, following Kate and Willa. Willa is the main female character's best friend from the first book, and Kate is the main male character from the first book's brother. So, do with that information as you may. It is your typical cowboy romance, small town romance. Kate is a single dad. He has a son named Luke, and he needs someone to take care of his son Luke. And Willa steps into the place, and basically it takes off from there. And it was a very enjoyable read. I honestly binge read this book, and it averaged a 4.38 on Goodreads, and I rated it a 4 stars, but I probably will bump it up to a 4.5 stars because of how much I loved it. So there's that. Going into the month of April. So the first book I read in April was Happily Never After by Lynn Painter. It was her new adult romance that came out this year. And this book averaged a 3.70 on Goodreads, and I rated it at 3 stars. The premise of the book, very compelling. I was very intrigued the first time I read the premise of the book, and it turned out to be quite the short and sweet read. It was a good palate cleanser, but did I love it as much as I loved her young adult books? I don't think so. I think it's more of just a palate cleanser, but it was very, very entertaining. And I love her writing style, anyways. It goes by so fast, and I absolutely enjoyed reading her books in particular. The next book that I read was Powerless by Elsie Silver, which is the third book from Chestnut Spring series that follows Sloane and Jasper. Jasper is one of their friends that is a hockey player, and Sloane is a ballerina, which is the Eaton brothers' cousin, I believe. I hope I'm I hope I'm saying this right. But yeah, childhood friends to lovers, your typical small town cowboy romance, and it was a good time. It averaged a 4.07 on Goodreads, and I rated it a 4 stars. But I don't think Powerless was my favorite book from the series, so yeah, I think I probably will put it to a 3.75. The next book that I read in the month of April was Happy Place by Emily Henry. I read this book last year, and I decided to reread this book again because I loved it so much. And this book averaged a 3.97 on Goodreads, and upon my reread, I rated it a 5 stars because I just couldn't get enough of the book. I love the romance aspect, I love the friendship dynamic, the found family, the setting it took place in. The next book that I read while waiting for this book in particular, I did reread Happy Place, but the next book that I was very looking forward to reading this year was Funny Story by Emily Henry. When I told you guys, I sprinted to the bookstore to get this book because it was so hard to get this book at that time because everybody was anticipating this new release by Miss Emily Henry. It averaged a 4.24 on Goodreads. It was a really likable book. It's not my favorite Emily Henry book, but I remember relating so much to the female main character of this book. Her name is Daphne. So the premise of the book, Daphne and Miles, they are put into a situation where they are now roommates because their exes decided to get together prior to the female main character Daphne and her then fiance getting married. And so, yeah. So I rated this book a 4.5 stars. It's not the most romantic book I feel, but it was, as we all know, Emily Henry is more of a women's fiction writer, and I loved it nonetheless. But I guess because of the subplot of romance, I don't think it was my favorite, but I still enjoyed the book anyway. So 4.5 stars. The next book I read in the month of May was one of my favorite reads this year, and that is Reckless by Elsie Silver from the Chestnut Spring series. This is book 4 in the Chestnut Spring series. This averaged a 4.38 stars on Goodreads, and I rated it a 5 infinite stars. The thing that really took me by surprise was Theo Silva. I First of all, let's backtrack. I love Winter. Winter is Summer's sister from the first book. Read Mentors Theo and bull riding. Absolutely loved the dynamic between Theo and Winter right from the start of the book while I was reading it. I was just so excited to read them together. Their banter was just so amazing. The first part of the book, though, like a couple of pages while we were getting introduced to both of them, and what happens in between and why they can't see eye to eye completely in the book irritated me to a level where I was just like, I'm either going to hate Theo and this book will really, really ruin it for me, or something might have to happen that will leave me surprised and shook, and I will forever love this book. And thank God it was the latter because I absolutely love this book. And Theo in that book, the banter and his heartfelt confessions and heartfelt words to Winter was just absolutely amazing. One of my favorite book boyfriends to ever exist. Well, in the pages. Moving on. The 7 Year Slip by Ashley Poston. Now, I rated this book of 4 stars. I think it is more of because of the time that I read this book. The timing was just really awful at that time. I was in my way to finishing my thesis, but I also really needed some help staying sane, and so reading my books were my getaway from actually doing my thesis, and just having like a cleansed mind while I just like calm down, chill out, and just taking my time to rest and whatnot. I will be reading the 7 Year Slip in between. And so I feel like I loved most of the things that were written in the book, but I kind of, because I was like so busy with my thesis, I kind of felt like the story just kind of escaped me, and I don't really have anything to report back about that book. But I did remember during that time when I was reading it, I was like, oh, I like this quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. Like, I think I have a couple of quotes highlighted from the book, anyways. This book averaged a 4.20 on Goodreads, and I rated it a 4 stars. Next up, we are in our way to the month of June. My first read, and this was after finishing my thesis and doing my thesis defense. Picked up a new book, and that was Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, my second Abby Jimenez book, and this book averaged a 4.38 stars on Goodreads, and I rated it a 4 stars, but now that I think about it, this might just be a 5 stars. I still think about the characters to this day. Justin is the definition of if he wanted to, he will. And just, I just love Justin in this book. As I said, I think there is something about men who does what he says, or like shows his love by what he does and not from words. It kind of does it for me as well, but I'm also like a words of affirmation girl, so like I don't know. I feel like there are just like some parts of me that swoon over words of affirmation in books, and then there's part of me where I'll just like swoon over like acts of service and whatnot. And I think that Justin here in this book is the definition of acts of service meets words of affirmation. So I love this book. We basically follow these two characters. Her name is Emma, and Emma is a traveling nurse. She is traveling with her best friend, and they are staying at this town. I forget where it takes place, but they're staying at the small town, I believe, and they are working there for six weeks. Is it? Can't remember. But basically, Emma and Justin feel like they have a curse on them because they met via, what was it, like Reddit? They met via Reddit because Justin here posted an article about his bad luck in finding love. Basically, whenever he breaks up with his then girlfriend will turn out to find her true love and the person she marries right after she breaks up with Justin. And the same thing goes with Emma as well. And so they basically feel like these things that are keep happening to them, this is a curse and we need to break it. And so they decided to fake date to cancel out that said curse. And I would really really like to reread this book next year. And yeah, as I said, I rated this book a 4.5 stars, but I probably will just bump it up to a 5 stars because I absolutely loved it. The next book I read, I think in the month of June, I read a lot of new releases because the next book that I read was Wild Love by Elsie Silver, which is her new series, that is the Rose Hill series, and this is the first book. This book averaged a 4.07 on Goodreads, and I rated it a good old 4 stars. Well, let's just read the summary on Goodreads because I'm not good at this. The kind of wild that comes with wanting your best friend's little sister and knowing you can't have her. Forbes may have labeled Ford Grant the world's hottest billionaire, but all he cares about is escaping the press and opening a recording studio in gorgeous small town Rose Hill. Something that comes to a screeching halt when he ends up face to face with a young girl who claims he's her biological father. Now he spends his days balancing business with parenting a sullen 12-year-old, all while trying desperately to keep his hands the hell off his best friend's sister, Rosie Belmont. After living in the city, Rosie came blasting back into town like a storm, beautiful, messy, and chaotic, and one wide eyed, desperate plea for a job is all it takes for Ford to hire her. He vows to keep her at arm's length, tries to stick to skulls and grumpy one liners, but with her, verbal sparring is a type of foreplay. Friction that soon turns to blistering heat. Ford knows damn well he shouldn't cross this line, but shouldn't and can't are two very different things, and the only thing he truly can't do is resist her. So that's that. That's the premise of the book. And as I said, I rated it a 4 star, so it was a really great read for me. And that was all of the book that I read for the first half of the year. And I'm moving on to the second half of the year, starting from July. First read for the month of July, and may I say, July was such a great reading month for me. I found really great books, and I think I had almost rated most of these books pretty high. I think I only had one book that was kind of a flop for me, but the rest really great books. So starting off from the first book that I read in the month of July was The Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. This book was Carly Fortune's newest release. I felt very indifferent about her two books prior to this one. I didn't really enjoy it that much because of the premise of the book, I guess. But this book, this summer will be different. It actually was different from the two books prior to this, and I actually enjoyed it. I rated it at 3.75, and this book actually averaged a 3.99 on Goodreads, and may I say it was one of my favorite. And I've written quite a review here. Over here I had my review 3.75. I loved the plot. The ending got a little rushed and minimized, got a bit spicier at the end, made me question if I was reading the same book. But I loved the premise, loved the setting. Overall was an enjoyable summer read. And I have to agree. Still have to agree with my opinion about this book the first time I read it. I think it is an enjoyable read, and I feel like Carly Fortune's book is now on my must read during the summertime, so I'm very excited for her new release next year. Next up is Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. This book was the book that I took with me to Bangkok when I was having my summer trip, and this book averaged a 3.93 on Goodreads, and I rated this book a 5 stars because I absolutely enjoyed it. I was in Bangkok for how long was I there? I was there for like 10 days, and I finished the book within those 10 days in Bangkok. Like I was reading it on the flight to Bangkok, so I started it there and I ended it the flight back to Jakarta. So it was really great. Um, I also got to read this by the pool, which was really nice. I got to read it at the hotel balcony, which is just an atmospheric, and I just enjoyed it. The experience of reading a Catherine Center book while you're on vacation, absolutely adored it. So 5 stars. And the premise of the book is basically about this girl. Her name is Sadie. She is a portrait artist, so she basically paints faces for a living. And one day she gets this very tragic incident happen to her where she had a seizure and she had to get a surgery, a brain surgery to, heal her from the seizure. And afterwards, after the surgery, she actually ended up not being able to see faces clearly. So it's like puzzle pieces where the pieces in the face, like the eyes, the mouth, the nose were all disheveled, and she couldn't figure out what was going on and whatnot. So she's navigating through that while also trying to complete this portrait that she has to complete for a, what was it? I think it was like an event, I believe. So there's that, and I think that that story is just so great, and the writing was just so amazing, very comfort writing, I feel. And so I am looking forward to rereading that book next year as well, and also reading her newest release, which was the rom-comers. And then also I'm very excited for her new release next year, which is The Love Haters. Yeah, that's the name of the book, and I'm so excited to read The Love Haters next year. The next book I read was a very, very well anticipated read of the year, new release of the year, and that was Reckless by Lauren Roberts, the second book in the Powerless trilogy. This book, I rated it a 5 stars right after finishing because the ending, I already guessed the ending of the book, but I cannot tell you more about it. It's basically a cat and mouse situation between the two main characters. This book averaged a 4.07 on Goodreads, and I rated it 5 stars after finishing it because I think the ending and me being able to guess the ending really left me shocked and happy that I actually guessed it right. But yeah, I enjoyed it, but I don't love it as much as I love the first book, obviously, because she did say, Lauren Roberts did say, the writer that said that this book was actually like a bridging in between the first and the third book. So we're going to pick up pace again in the third book, and I'm very excited for that. So can't wait to read that next year. Oh my gosh. Then the next book that I read was The Happy Ever After playlist by Abby Jimenez. Now, this was the book that was kind of a flop for me, and it wasn't that I didn't like the book or the book was bad. It's just that it's not my favorite book by her because I did read Yours Truly and just for the summer prior to reading this one, and the Happy Ever After playlist was a book that was in an interconnected series before the Part of Your World interconnected series. So yeah, this book averaged a 4.18 on Goodreads, and I rated this book a 3.75 stars. Next up, one of my favorite reads ever from the year, and that is Play Along by Liz Tomford, which is the fourth book in the Windy City series. Now, I've said this in previous videos before, but I started reading the Windy City series from Play Along because I was intrigued when I watched Sarah Caroli's video where she was reading Play Along. I was very intrigued when I saw her reaction to this book, and I have similar book taste to her, so I trust her opinion on this book. And so I also was very intrigued because it has a similar plot to what happened with Rachel and Ross from Friends, and so I thought that would be really, really fun. So yeah. Uh, yeah, so Play Along by Liz Tromford follows Isaiah and Kennedy, and they are one of my favorite book couples this year, and probably this book will live in my mind rent free forever. This book averaged a 4.49, if I haven't told you already, on Goodreads, and I rated it a 5 infinite stars. Okay, moving on to the month of August. I read the same amount, but I think that in the month of August, I kind of fell into a really big reading slump, mainly because I think I had such an amazing month of reading in July, and it kind of went downhill after that. So the first book I read in the month of August was Match Point by Catherine Reilly. This book averaged 3.79, and I rated this book a 3.5 stars. I said that it was an okay read. I loved the setting of the book and the premise as well. So basically, the premise of the book is this girl, her name is Flora. She is an artist and she lives in London. She decided to rent her flat for the season because it was Wimbledon season. If you guys don't know what Wimbledon is, it's basically a tennis tournament set in Wimbledon. So there you have it. And this very famous tennis player. His name is Kieran, if I wasn't. I believe his name is Kieran, acted super rude to her, and I just really didn't like the character. It wasn't my favorite book either this year, but the setting for for the season Wimbledon, it was a really great read because during that time Wimbledon just finished, and back when I was in Bangkok I was actually watching Wimbledon with my grandparents, and so it kind of felt like I was reliving it again, and I just absolutely enjoyed the setting and the tennis talk and the Wimbledon season talk, and it was just really, it was a fun read. It was a fun read, a great palate cleanser for the summer, and yeah, I rated it 3.5 stars, and I think it'll stay a 3.5 stars. The next book that I read, this was also one of a flop for me, and that was Hopeless by Elsie Silver, the last book in the Chestnut Springs series. It wasn't my favorite, and I was a little bit scared to admit that this wasn't my favorite book by her because she is one of my new favorite authors this year. And yeah, I just really didn't enjoy it because this book made me cringe. To be completely honest, it made me cringe while I was reading this book because of the pet name he gave her, the female main character, and the things they talk about sometimes are just like way too like, I don't know. It was just crazy to think that people actually talk that way in public. But anyways, this book averaged a 4.12 on Goodreads, and back then I think I rated it 4 stars, but I think it's more of because I was scared to admit it. But now, upon rethinking and remembering how much I cringe, I probably will have to lower it to a 3.5 stars. The next book that I read in the month of August, I think this was one of the books that I really enjoyed reading, likewise, I guess. And it is a nonfiction, an autobiography. That is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. So I did I written down my thoughts on my review here, and I said that I'm not going to rate this book because I want to be sensible. This is her life story. I audiobooked it, and this book tells you that not everything is as it seems. I loved it. As I said, yeah, I audiobooked this book, so she was the one who narrates this audiobook anyway, so it just made more sense, and emotionally I got really I felt like she was telling me her life story personally because I was listening to the audiobook the entire day. I finished it in a day, and I absolutely loved it. And this book averaged a 4.45 stars on Goodreads. The next book I read, I also audiobooked this. I listened to an audiobook on YouTube, and that is Addicted to You by Krista and Becca Ritchie. And this is the first book in the Addicted Calloway Sisters series, and I kind of feel a little bit indifferent for this first book. I don't know what it is because a lot of people have compared the Addicted slash Calloway Sister series to Magnolia Parks, and I love Magnolia Parks. And they said that Addicted, the Addicted slash Calloway Sister series are basically the same the same thing as Magnolia Parks. They're just set in Philadelphia. It basically is rich people drama and whatnot, college students. But upon my first read of this first book, I really didn't. like it. Okay, that was kind of a strong word. It wasn't my cup of tea. My cup of tea, I guess. I rated it 3 stars, but a friend on Bookstagram, she told me that the first and second book wasn't her favorite, but keep going with the series, and you might start to develop something for the book. So I don't know. Maybe I will try to do that again, but who knows? The next book that was a flop for me this year was Mixed Signals by B.K. Borson. I don't know what happened during this time, but it was just not my favorite. Um, this was again, I think this was the height of my reading slump. I didn't enjoy this book, and it wasn't my favorite either. So yeah, but I thought the premise was cute. She's a baker, he's a teacher, and yeah, that's basically what the book is about. They started like, what was it? Oh yeah. So basically he was helping her to understand the dating realm because she has had bad luck in dating before. And so he's the one who helps her out with that, trying to help her navigate the dating life. I'm sorry, my internet just crashed for a second. This book averaged a 4.01 on Goodreads, and I rated it a 2 stars. The next book I read, and this is the first book I read in September, and that is Wild Eyes by Elsie Silver, the second book in the Rosehill series. This book averaged a 4.31 on Goodreads, and I rated this book a 4 stars. This book basically follows Rosie's brother from the first book and a pop star on the run that basically reminded me of Britney Spears. Somehow it reminded me of Britney Spears. Her name is Skylar, and so she runs to the small town of Rosehill, and she's basically running away from the press and her life as a pop star. And I actually really like this book. As I said, I rated it 4 stars. I think I will bump it to a 4.5 stars because I really did enjoy reading this book. The next book that I read was Caught Up by Liz Tom Ford. So I'm starting from the last book and working my way up. And this book is the third book in the series. And it follows Kai, which is Isaiah's older brother from the play along book that I just talked about. This book averaged a 4.43 on Goodreads, and I rated it 5 stars. Now, where Play Along feels very playful and fun and just really happy book, Caught Up is the same, just it kind of tugs on my heartstrings a little bit more, and I was very emotionally invested in this book, and I absolutely loved it. This follows Kai and Miller. Kai is, as I said, Isaiah's older brother from Play Along, and Miller is their coach's daughter that comes to visit her dad while she's having this like a break from her career because she is burnt out, and she's basically just trying to navigate what's her next step, what she's gonna do, and whatnot. And so there's that. I enjoyed that book so much, and I rated it a 5 stars. Now on to the month of October. The first book I read was Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh, the first book in the Boys of Tommen series. This book I buddy read with my book bestie Amy. Shout out to Amy because you are awesome and I love you. This book, Binding 13, was honestly, I was very scared to start this book because I thought that I was either going to love it so much or I'm really not going to enjoy it because a lot of people said that this book is very heavy and it's very emotional and whatnot. And I was aware of that, but I was very shocked at the amount of pages. First off, the amount of pages was a lot. It was a thick book. And second, though it may be as thick as the Bible, but I think that that book is actually really good, and because the writing is really fast paced. And the thing about and one of the things that I loved about this book is that it has a lot of like Irish slang because it is set in Dublin, Ireland, and I've always wanted to go to Dublin. I've always wanted to visit Ireland, and so it kind of gives you a glimpse of Ireland in this book. And one of the things that I also loved about this book was that this book was set in the early 2000. I think it was set in 2005, I believe. And so there was a mention about like burned CDs, cassette tapes, Walkmans, and whatnot. And Johnny actually made this like cassette tape that he um I don't know what it was like that is it like a or was it like a CD? I forgot, but he burned this like mixtape for Shannon, and there was such great music in there. There was Coldplay, there was U2, a lot of amazing songs that I absolutely loved, Maroon 5, and I was just like, yep, this is peak early 2000s and I love it. And I rated that book a 4 stars, but I might bump it up to a 4.75. The next book that I read was The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Now, I've had this book for a year and I finally finished the book. And I absolutely devoured the last couple of pages of the book. It was very fast paced once I got into the book and I started reading it again because I did start reading this book back in April, but I never finished it. And it was just really, really hard at that time to pick up a book. But I finally found my rhythm in the last few months of this year. And yeah, I absolutely love this book. It averaged a 4.20 on Goodreads, but I rated it a 3.75 stars. The next book that I read, and I read this on my Kindle, and that was Nothing Like the Movies by Lynn Painter, which is the second book, the sequel from Better Than the Movies. This book averaged a 4.01 rating on Goodreads, and I have to agree, a 4 stars as well. This book wasn't my favorite because I think like we really didn't need this, I feel, but it was okay. I see a lot of Wes's point of view from this book, and I really, really enjoyed reading what he feels towards Liz and whatnot, trying to navigate the college life and what happens after high school. And it was a good read, but it wasn't my favorite, honestly. The next read is a novel love story by Ashley Poston. This was one of my most anticipated read of the year after reading The 7 Year Slip. I was very excited to read this book, and I think I fall into one of the people that really love this book. I rated this book of 5 stars, but this book averaged a 3.66 on Goodreads. But basically, the premise of this book is our female main character, she was driving up to meet her friends from a book club, and they were having like this book club retreat. But she ended up derailing, going on a detour, and she ended up stuck in a small town which was actually the fictional small town where her favorite book series takes place in. And she gets to meet all these characters and fall in love with one of them and all of that. And I just really, really loved it. As much as it feels very make believe and delusional or whatnot, I still loved it. It was a 5 stars for me. The next book that I read was The X Files by Jessica Joyce. This is my first book by the author, and this book averaged a 4.19 on Goodreads, and I rated it 3.75 stars. I think this was a sweet book, but somehow I felt while I was going through the book, the main character like irritated me a little bit while I was reading through the book. So I love the premise of the book. I love the found family aspect of the book, and I think the banter was really good between the two characters as well. So it was a likable book, and I rated it a 3.75, but I think I'd lower it to a 3 stars. Book I read, and this is oh wait, I forgot to tell you that the Axwells I read in the month of November. So next up is my second book in the month of November, which was One Dark Window by Rachel Gillick. It is a fantasy book, adding a fantasy to the mix. This is the first book in the duology of the Shepherd King duology. I haven't picked up the second book just yet. I think I'll wait for next year to read that book just because I want to like take some time off from reading for a while and just do what I need to do before the new year starts anyways. This book averaged a 4.29 stars on Goodreads, and I rated this book a 4.25. I absolutely loved it. It was really fast paced, though the magic system was a little bit complicated in this book, but I think it was a really likable book. If you guys love high stakes fantasy, you probably will like this book, so give it a try if you haven't already. So this is where I started to read my holiday reads. And the first book I read was The Christmas Wish by Lindsay Kelk. This book averaged a 3.87 on Goodreads, and I did try to read this book back in 2022, but I didn't get to finish it because I was cramming for finals during that time. And this year I decided to pick it back up and start it all over again. And I rated it a 3 stars. It was a fun book. It was basically a Groundhog's Day, but make it Christmas. That's literally what the book is about. The next book is Along Came Holly by Cody Hall. This is the third book in the Mistletoe Romance book, and I think this is an interconnected standalone. But this was book three, and I didn't know that this was book three, and I needed to read the first two books before this one. So I got a little bit spoiled, but it was kind of out of context, so I couldn't really understand what it was about. So, yeah, this book averaged a 3.6 on Goodreads, and I rated it a 3.5 stars. This book is basically your typical rom com where the girl is the holly jolly Christmas person and the guy is the Grinch, but opposites attract and whatnot. And yeah, that's basically the premise of the book. It was just a short and sweet book. The next book I read was The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox. This book was compared to The Princess Switch, I believe, with Vanessa Hudgens on Netflix, but it also reminded me of like those TLC baking shows that was on. I used to watch those with my mom when I was younger, so it reminded me a lot about that. And this was more of a women's fiction type of book, and I actually liked it. I loved the dynamic between the twins, and it was just a really fun time reading, honestly. Then the next book that I read, this is the second to last book that I read this year. It is If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nolan. This is a really sad book that I randomly decided to pick up this year. I didn't think I would have picked up another book after I finished the holiday swap, but I did. And this book averaged a 3.80 on Goodreads, and I haven't given a rating yet on this book, but because I'm still thinking about the characters, I might as well just give it a 4 stars because, yeah, I'm still thinking about them. I devoured this book. It was really good. I love the writing style, and yeah, it's still very emotional for me. Next up, and this is the last book that I will be rating this year, and the last book that I read was Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I finally decided to pick this book up after this book been staring at me for the last 2 years of my reading career. Um, for what it is and what the what the cover made me believe that this was going to be like a better than the movies type of book, like a young adult, new adult kind of a book, but it's not. The amount of spice in the book surprised me, and yeah, I just found myself like flipping through the book. I was reading it on my Kindle anyway, so like flipping and like tapping my page to like just skip the spice scenes because I feel like it's unnecessary for how long the book was. Like you could probably cut most of the spice scenes, and the book would be a little bit more shorter, and it made more sense. But for what it was, I rated Icebreaker a 3.5 stars. Wasn't my favorite book, so. And then I just wanted to go through some of the books that I started to read this year but haven't completed, some of the books that I DNF'd this year. And starting off, the first book that I DNF'd this year was The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I think I've said this before in previous videos that I think that this book was very complicated for me because there were a lot of point of views. It was multiple point of views, and the chapters were pretty short, so it was easy for me to get through like the first 70 to 80 pages of the book. But it kind of just made no sense to me, and I felt like this wasn't going nowhere for me. So I put the book down because it was just so confusing to me. The next book that I started this year but haven't finished was Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. We all know is the beloved classic book, and I feel like because I already know, I've watched the movie before. I watched the movie with Timothy Chalamet and Florence Pugh and Emma Watson and Saoirse Ronan. I think I pretty much know what the book is about, and I feel like I wanted to read some other books, so I put it on pause. Haven't picked it up since. Also, still reading my nonfiction books. We have Filosofi Teras, which is an Indonesian book by Henry Manampiring, and I've said this before. I need some time when I'm trying to read a nonfiction book, and right now, I'm still trying to process that book. And then there's also Untangle Your Emotions by Jenny Allen as well. I'm still reading through that book. It kind of feels like more of like a devotional for me because I read it as if it's a devotional for me. But anyways, it's going pretty well for me so far. And yeah, so those are all of the books. I feel like if I had just finished some of my nonfiction books, I would have already read 40 books this year. But because I'm still on book 38, so yeah. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for your support this entire year of 2024. I feel like next year I am so hopeful for a better year, and I'm so excited for new books that are going to be released next year, and I cannot wait to make more contents next year. And yeah, thank you guys so much for your support throughout the year. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys in the new year. Goodbye.